How do you get such natural sounding kicks, whether they are or not, to be so consistent without sounding over compressor saturated? I'm struggling to get fast kicks to be consistent in the low end.
Interesting. Well, you know what? I bet you everybody would probably still agree with that sentiment of like struggling with getting the low end correct on fast kicks. You know, it's a constant
issue. The forever war.
But I would say, you know, it's interesting. I've done records with acoustic kicks in the past, some bands at certain times. I've done a variance of things, but the one thing that I've only done on a few records of my whole career, and that was only because it was specified, is I don't quantize. So I'm not a quantized, and not saying it's right or wrong. Everybody has, you know, I'm not the God almighty on this kind of stuff, you know, like I always believe like, hey, if you feel like everything should be chopped up and that's what fits your sound, then more to you. But I came from the old school approach. Everything I did was analog. I graduated engineering school. I remember when I was in school, we had a 1 hour lab class on sound tools. You know, it was like a black and white screen and you're editing. They were just starting sound tools, wasn't even Pro Tools. So like all that stuff didn't even exist. But to me, when it comes to the tonality, you know, I feel like the lack of quantization on kick drums creates something different also, as well as like the feel, obviously, and things of that nature. And of course, you know, I say this, I've said this before and probably on our last interview, is like, I use Pro Tools. I don't abuse Pro Tools, you know? And so like, for me, I want everybody I record, I want them to sound like them on their best day, not like the Terminator version of them. And so I've approached recording like that. And somebody might say, wow, you know, that the drummer sounds like he's like losing it there. Well, he probably was. He was probably like struggling.
It was highly likely.
But, you know, in this day and age, especially, it's very uncommon, I guess. But the one thing I like to do too is have a slightly detuned kick drum from the other, you know, and not use multiple kick drum samples, you know. So sometimes I'll just sample the kicks from the actual kit, you know, and then use those same kick drums. And I know a lot of guys don't even record with kicks, they use the pads. And I understand that too because of the bleed. And certainly if you're, you know, if you're quantizing and things like that and using beat detective and stuff, it makes it easier. And there's no right or wrong. This is all just personal preference, how I do things. But between the lack of quantization, and like I said, some records, if bands want that sound, well, then of course I'm going to do that for them because that's what they want, you know. But most of the guys I record with they're older school guys, and you know, so they appreciate the approach. And I figured out creative ways to edit if I need to, or I do a lot of punching as well. But I'm not the over punch guy either, because I really believe in capturing the performances. And that's something that's kind of rare, I guess, too, in our field these days. But I like to capture good performances, and I feel like that adds something to it. And then in the kick drums, using slightly different tuning of the left and right kick, but you got to be careful, because I've learned that too. Is like, you don't want it like the titu, and that's common in acoustic kicks, right? Like behind me, I got a Pearl reference kit. It's my personal house kit, and I love the kit. The two kick drums, they sound fucking amazing. I've gotten some great samples from them, and they're just slightly different, you know, but not just because of the tuning, but the actual root note of the kick is just slightly different from each other. If it's too different, then to me, that's like really annoying. So I don't want them to be, you know, like way off from each other, but just a slight detuning of the left and right kick, to me, has helped that low end issue. And I don't know if it has anything to do with the lack of quantization or not, actually, but the slightly different tuning of the kick, I've noticed, can help get rid of that. I don't know, like that lightsaber low end of, you know, and I mean, but I'm certainly, I'm far from an expert on this. I wish I could give a more expert answer, but I'm still learning. I'm still, like I said, man, I've worked on a lot of shit, but
I think that what you just said was very, very, very helpful stuff. It's variation, adding variation into the sound, whether it's from the tuning or from the performance, so that it's not
exactly.
It's not the buildup of the same frequency just over and over and over like a machine gun. Like
exactly,
yeah, that variation helps.
That's really important. The variation, I think, whether it's a combination of what I mentioned, but certainly I think that's because if you have like one kick sample and it's like 260 and it's just like it's that low end buildup, and also, man, I mean, high pass filtering is, obviously that's I guess I should mention that too, is like, from my experience, it's like, well, the human ear hears, well, a good ear, right? Not a shot ear, but they say 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. That's what we hear, right? And there's arguments like, can really people hear above 16 kilohertz, or can people really hear to 20 hertz? Well, that's what the scientists say, so I'm just repeating it, or that's what I learned at school 30 years ago. But the one thing you learn when you're doing, like, say, if I pop on a rap record or some R&B, well, there's definitely a whole different sub factor going on with that kind of music, because it's a part of that arrangement. It's a part of that sound. With fast double bass, definitely high pass filtering, multi-band compression. Those are things that help as well. It's a fine line. I wouldn't say I do the same thing every time either, but there's some things that I do that are very similar, but all those things are really helpful, because when you're playing fast death metal, you got fast double bass all the time, some of that lower sub, you just need to get it the fuck out of there, because it doesn't work anywhere. It just muddies up the thing. And I like to keep, anyone knows, like, I'm not afraid of low ends. That's not my MO, but, and people might argue that maybe I use a little too much on some production, and that's fair. But I don't like to suck out a ton of low end, but at the same time, some of it with faster,
you have to.
It's got to go. Yeah. But I'm definitely not that guy either that just notch. I know a lot of guys like to carve out everything, and kind of like my performance aspect when it comes to production, I'm the same way. I like to preserve as much as I can. Like I'm not like doing like 12 different notch filters and all this stuff. I usually don't do that. I'm moving around the mics and tweaking the amp and the pedal, and then the height of the pickups and the approach of the pick, or maybe, like, I do a lot of things before it gets to that point to try to get what I'm looking for from the ground up, from the foundation, rather than the fix it later
from the source. Yeah, that makes
exactly.
So it's a good way to do things, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, absolutely.